I know, it's nice when it clears up.
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
I always come with an extra set of batteries.
You're super, you're like Boy Scout prepared.
More audio visual. I've been playing gigs for long.
Yeah.
Anything that can go wrong with audio, I will.
Well, that's a good talent. Okay, everybody, 2:02 maybe, so let's get started. Welcome back. It's been a little bit a while. We had some illnesses, some departures, some hiatuses, and my goal now is to get through this project with everyone alive and well. That would be. I'm bringing the goalpost down. Let's make it. Let's make it. So, but we are getting to some nice kind of more meta global types of issues. As you guys remember, or if you were here, we did a nice exercise last time of going through all the kind of components of a final draft and deciding what to keep, what to move, what to condense, what to expand. So I just wanted to orient us to that. So we're all called to order. Where's the, oh, in the back. I have it. Oh, okay.
Yep.
We're called to order. Everybody is here except Mary Ann. That's the roll call, and she will not be joining us by Zoom. She's out of town. So are there any public comments from non-steering committee members on non-agenda items?
Does your dog want to say something?
Bubbles would like to bite somebody.
Is that Bubbles? Is that his name? Okay, I didn't remember that. Okay. Welcome, Bubbles. So nothing there. So then announcements from the group here, the four of us. Anybody? And Brandon, any other announcements?
I'd just kind of like to make a comment if I could. You know, we have our founding principles for our document, and we've all felt very strongly about those principles. I just want to say to all of you that currently there is, how do I want to say this? Currently there is a review of the Forest Master Plan going on, and I have some real serious problems with it because it does not discuss the city's forest as an urbanized forest, i.e. a forest that existed before humans ever came and is now inhabited by humans, in contradistinction to a forest that's being planted now because it's environmentally sensitive and the right thing to do. So it's kind of like Carmel, which was a huge natural pine forest that has existed on this earth for over 15 million years, and say what Stockton is doing today with planting hundreds of thousands of trees so that they have a forest and a good, clean environment to live in. You see what I'm saying? The difference? Okay, so what's happening with our forest master plan, let me step back a second. The general plan, the local coastal plan, and our zoning talk about us as being an urbanized forest. In other words, the forest came before us. And the responsibility that we have as residents of this community to protect and preserve and enhance that forest. Well, what's going on right now is just the opposite. We are going through a master plan, forest master plan review, and in the process, we're not waiting to study everything and find out what the end result of this master plan is. What we're doing is effectuating the goals of an urban forest and an urbanized forest before the master plan is even done. In other words, what I'm saying is the city is wholesalely taking down trees and planting some new trees. But these new trees are all what a friend of mine calls lollipop trees. They are totally non-indigenous trees. They are like decorative trees. They are not replacing our oaks and the pine forest. And what is happening in the urban areas is they're talking about planting trees in a percentage so that, quote unquote, you can mitigate a fire if you have a lot of decorative trees and different trees, as opposed to like us, where we have native trees, and native trees are always more protective of fire and so on and so forth than artificial trees or just decorative trees. But I want you to look around town and see, when you're walking or driving, how many of these lollipop trees are coming up all over town. And what's going to happen is that they're talking about a huge change in the environment of this town. 10% will be Monterey natural pines. 10% will be oaks, and the rest will be non-indigenous trees. Now, the reason people come here is, number one, because of the forest, the beach, the natural environment. This whole town was founded on its natural environment. People were original environmentalists at that time. I mean, Sterling bought his property because there was, in Perry Newberry, because of the tree that was on the lot that they bought. I mean, people were very sensitive to that. And one of the reasons this town was incorporated is because Monterey County was not being sensitive to our natural habitat. And they were doing things that were inconsistent with what our founding fathers and so forth believed in. So
Melanie, do you have like a recommendation for the group?
I have,
Or maybe a relationship to what we can do on the steering committee? I mean, I think we are doing quite a bit in terms
well,
of.
we are, but it's going to be obliterated by these changes, because there are going to be changes in our zoning, there are going to be changes in the land use plan, and there are going to be changes in the general plan. There have to be to effectuate this. And it's all going to be piecemeal. It's not going to be part of an overall view of the zoning ordinance, the land use element, or anything. All this stuff is being done piecemeal so that we don't have an understanding of what's going on in the community.
Is there something you think the steering committee or this group can do?
Well, I think number one, we need to go to some of those meetings, like tomorrow. And let's see, what time is it? 3 to 5, I think. One big thing that they're doing tomorrow is they're looking at this survey. And this survey's been put together by Davy and Company. And I've already told everybody what I think about Davy and Company. But the people who are in charge of this are two very nice people, but they're horticulturists. They're not botanists, they're not, experts in our forest. And they're looking at a survey that's very much like just a generic survey that they would give to any town that does not have an urbanized forest. It's just like a stock thing that they do when they go consulting to other communities.
Will you give everyone the details? So tomorrow, you think which meeting is it tomorrow?
It's Forest and Beach.
Forest and Beach, 3
Uh-huh.
to 5?
Yeah, and yeah, and the problem of it is, the Forest and Beach Commission appointed their own subcommittee because they are a city committee. So they appointed their own committee, and half of those members do not like pine trees and do not like the forest. And so their push is, to change what's going on with regard to the forest. And one thing they ask in this survey is, what do you think about pine trees, Monterey pine trees? Well, most people in this town don't know jack diddly about Monterey pines or this pine forest or the, the origin of this forest. So, they have no frame of reference to make a judgment. All they do is maybe last winter it fell on my neighbor's house, so, guess what? I don't like pine trees. So,
Melanie, can I ask
Yeah.
Brandon a question related to your
Sure.
announcement? Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
So, I know this isn't quite on topic, Brandon, but
Not even close.
if a document from the city were to be developed that is in contradiction to some other documents in the city, for example, what we've developed around the table, which is very much about native and preserving the urbanized forest, what happens then? I mean, maybe this is just a general question,
So no, it's a good question. So the general practice should be, like a best practice when you do any sort of regulatory document, whether it's our design guidelines or the wireless ordinance that I just took the planning commission, or the 80 ordinance that we're working on, timeshare ordinance that just got continued from the coastal commission today, all these regulatory documents that we're working on, you should do a cross-check, like a conformance check or a compatibility check. So that should happen at some point along the way for the forest management plan. Same thing we're doing here. I mean, that's driving some of the changes we're going to be doing in our zoning code relative to this project, because when we go through it, we realized, oh, even if we weren't doing this project, some of our zoning code stuff is non-conforming. It doesn't comport with itself in other parts. So that should be part of that process. That's just how you're supposed to do it in government. So
is it possible that if, so it sounds like, we're obviously much further along than this other group, what this group is. And so it's possible that, if the principles and the layout of what we've done here is approved by the council, and then something else comes along that is contradictory to it, we can duke it out then. So I think it's a good idea to show up now early and make the urbanized forest case. But I also just want to establish that there will be other bites of the apple where I'm, perfectly personally happy to defend what's been done at this table to very much to preserve this urbanized forest. And so, if it comes to it, I don't mind,
Well, and I think what I'll add to that is, we're all on the same team here at the city. So I don't, hopefully it would never come to, as you put it, duking it out. It would be more, I understand. We're all very passionate and we care about the work that we've all done for this long amount of time, but I don't see that being the outcome. I mean, that this committee and this project has been operating under the auspices of the guidance we got from city council, and that's what this urban forest management plan project is as well. So it's the same, in theory, the same city council directing all that. So if we're doing something that we believe, and I feel like we've gotten some good feedback that we're heading in the right direction, that we feel is the right direction for this, that should help inform. In a lot of ways, it's actually a head start for those forest management plan folks, because we've sort of sussed out some of these conversations already. So what I can do is I would encourage the committee members and anyone here in the public as well to attend the meeting like Melanie did. I think that's a wonderful suggestion. And then just at the staff level, staff to staff, I can, call up to my counterparts up there in Public Works and say, hey, because I've mentioned it before, but I mean, it might be worth them actually opening the drafts that we have and looking to see where it's going so they can share that with their consultants as well.
Just a couple wrap-up things. Number one,
Hold on.
my understanding is that they're going to approve this survey, and it's on tap for tomorrow. And then everything's going up to the city council. So there is a very short time frame. The study of this is not like our detailed study. And I just want to thank Brandon for, being as open and receptive and helpful in doing the design guidelines. I went to the last meeting and I was a little bit concerned, needless to say, and I'm very concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow because, like many people in this community, the people there might have wonderful intentions. I don't know any of them. Well, I know one, and but I'm really not. I don't know any of them personally. So this is not to cast aspersions, but there's very little knowledge there of the environment of this community and of this peninsula, and its whole heritage, and so that makes the acceptance of something from them very problematic, and my original concern with this started out because I could see the conflicts that were existing between what we're doing and what they're doing. And so I wanted to bring that, to your attention. I do not want to see this whole thing get mocked up and sent to the council, and then we come in afterwards and, well, what you've done is not consistent with the new master plan. And so I'm very concerned about that.
I think it's good that you're raising the alarm, Melanie, and I think that I think it's good that you're raising the alarm. I think it's good to perceive early trends that may be pointing in the wrong direction. I think we have a little bit of some things we can do.
I will say there is still a long ways to go on them. Yeah, when it's not going to council for adoption or anything like that. There's still community meetings that need to happen on a draft that hasn't been completed yet. So there's still, this isn't like happening in the next month or two.
So are going to have community meetings that we can participate at that time?
Yeah.
So, but thank you for sending up a flare. But if there's no other announcements, Don, do you have an announcement?
Well, all I was going to say, this is a real revelation, what Melanie just said, particularly that ratio of trees. Brandon, can you answer that? Is that true? Minority of the trees to be planted? 10%. Yeah.
I don't know where that's
Well, that's got to be changed, and fast.
Yeah. Well,
Are you going to be at the meeting out?
I'm going to let you. Okay, and third is agreed. Super important. Those ratios would be disturbing if that's correct, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. And we have Brandon here.
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, because it's not, like I said, it's.
You could say that, and then that just has no.
Sure, yeah, I mean, again, I would encourage folks to show up tomorrow. I mean, I'll reiterate what I said, that this is not, it's not like there's a draft that's been somehow approved and vetted behind the scenes and it's going to be one and done at city council. Like, this is definitely a process. So these are the kind of things that will come out. There's been one community meeting, albeit it was not very well attended, and I think could have been advertised a little better as well. But there will be more.
Thanks for being vigilant.
Yeah.
absolutely correct. I didn't even know about that first meeting until it was upon us, and then I was in a place where I couldn't respond, so I asked other people to go. So there are community people who went to it, not in the numbers that they would have normally, but, and then at the last meeting, I encouraged them to do some more public education as well as public announcements, and to involve the public more in what they were doing. Their whole approach is very unlike, yours has been, ours has been, Brandon. And so that's what deeply concerned me, is just the whole way this is being handled, and I talked to you about that.
Well, let's fix it. I think, as Brandon said, I think this is a good early warning, and I think we need to show up, and I very much appreciate your vigilance, Melanie. But we do have to move on. I'm sorry, it's been 20 minutes. So Brandon would be the next person up for receiving an update on the consultant and staff work product.
Thank you very much. Not a huge update. I did want to share, I was going to actually mention, and Melanie did a much better job than I, mentioning that the Forest and Beach Commission is looking at the forest management plan tomorrow. So I was going to mention that folks should go look at that because it is tied to what we're doing. Right now, what we are working on mostly is putting together that sandwich that we worked on last time. So if you recall, we got really good direction from this committee on what the other elements that go around the meat of that sandwich are. I'm going to stick with a food analogy because it works. So we're working mostly on that right now. we had talked at one point, and I just want to, I guess calm some nerves, because Doug brought up a really good point, that, we did receive direction from city council that something needed to be done by December. What that thing was a little bit ambiguous. What I took that to mean was that we need to have a product that's finished that we can launch in December. Not that this whole thing needs to be wrapped up by December, because that was, as Doug pointed out, would be altogether impossible to have enough time for the committee and the community to be done and go through adoption hearings and all that by December. So what I'm looking at it from a timeline perspective is that December is when we've done our work, we've met with the community enough, we feel like we have a good sort of final draft that we can start running through the adoption hearings into the start of the next year. So I wanted to share that. That's sort of like the big milestone that's out there right now. Those are my big updates right now. There's no update on landscaping ordinance. We haven't done any work on that. I've been altogether busy with other components of this project, like working on the sandwich and getting ready for other meetings and ordinances and things like that. But happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Any questions from the group? Yeah, Doug?
Is there a timetable on the landscape ordinance? Okay, because let's review history here. Mary Ann brought that up in April of '22. We went to the council in December of '22. At that point, it was indicated that something would be back in a couple of months, and now we're moving into December of '23 in a couple of months. So,
Ordinance will be back in a couple months?
no, the outline for the recruitment of a firm to do it. So I'm afraid we're going to lapse and be out of existence before anything's done on the landscape ordinance, which is an anchor to our report.
There's a question there, I think, or a concern.
No,
anyway.
the answer was no. I don't have a timeline. For
Oh,
that.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hear the comment though.
Any other questions? We're still on receiving an update on consultant staff work products, so just any thoughts about that item? Okay. So now we're going to move on to discussion items. We've got, this, you passed this out too? Yeah.
I did.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, there's materials. If you didn't grab them, looks like most everyone has them. There's materials up front on the front table, as usual.
Yeah. So we have basically a couple different categories of things. Eventually, hopefully we'll get to talking about how we want to approach the photography kind of shot list idea, or a meeting about that. That's kind of at the end of this.
This page is for item
4, right?
5A.
I5, sorry. Right.
Yep, and then 5B will be the diagrams over here. So we can just go down this list and if you want. Start.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
How are we doing?
So those are the
I'm not sure I
you want me
followed
to tee it up for
it.
you?
No, it's
Yeah.
okay. I mean, we have 5, if you look at your agendas, 5A is to discuss the cleanup design topic. So,
Yep,
and
that's
you're saying
and
this
that's
is
list.
5A.
This is the list. So you can see agenda item, I wrote 4.
Okay, that's where I was getting,
5A.
you meant
Discuss
5A.
provided
Okay.
guidance. Yeah, these are the cleanup items we talked about.
Okay, good.
Before the meeting.
Thank you.
And there's room for people to add them if they want.
Thank you. I was getting numerically challenged.
No, I challenge you. It's not your fault. It was mine.
So, yeah, we had pretty much gotten through quite a bit of cleanup design topics, but there were some that had not yet been addressed. This fire pits and trash enclosures, something we have never discussed really, except that we need to discuss them. So we don't have a particular place for them necessarily. It's really never been in the design guidelines before. I don't think it's gonna be hard to find a place for them, but we could just talk about them independently and then think about where they might want to go if we feel like it, but that's probably not the most urgent thing. So I don't know, do folks have these were both items brought up by Melanie. I don't know if you have initial thoughts that you want to talk about for either one of these things. I will just say about trash enclosures that, to me, they kind of go in, they might relate to some other discussions we've had about utility concealment. We do have new language on that, and, that basically comes from the commercial district to come over and say, listen, like, residents, also please address these sort of unsightly necessities that are often in the front of the building. Sometimes when we have room space issues, they have to be there. But the utilities, we think we can, at least by and large, get out of the way or put in panels, et cetera. I would argue that the trash enclosures could follow suit in that way. What we've always done is said the first choice is always to integrate it into the architecture. So if you have a front wall, it would be the same material, it'd be behind the front wall, for example, something like that. Second choice is if it can't go back there, if there's no possible way to integrate it architecturally, then you integrate it aesthetically, but it's, meaning it's painted out, it's concealed, et cetera. And I don't know if there's anything more, but that's the kind of hierarchy we've faced in the past. Yes, please.
So I would suggest that those are really good points on number 2, the trash enclosures. What I was thinking perhaps, because you're right, number 1 and number 2 were items on Melanie's sort of hit list that was left over, and so we wanted to make sure we talked about those. So I would offer maybe we just go in order, start with fire pits. Perhaps Melanie can give us, a couple minutes on, or however much you want to talk, about what it was about fire pits you were most concerned from a design perspective. Then we can have that conversation, kind of check fire pits off the list, and then do the same. You give it back to Melanie for trash enclosures. Would that be okay? We just go down the list?
I'm
Okay.
just pointing out that I think there's a similarity to one of them where we could maybe have a minimal discussion on trash enclosures. That's my guess.
Yeah. Well, fire pits, to me, they're extremely dangerous, and it's kind of a fad that's grown up more recently about fire pits. And I consider them to be, in our community, I consider them to be inappropriate because, number one, our lots are generally so small and our outdoor spaces are so small that they tend to be very cramped, generally towards the property lines, and it's a noise, produces a noise element for people on the other side of them, neighbors. It is a potential, just another problem with potential fires. I walked by a house that had one on top of the garage. On this part, the north part of the property, there were bushes on top of the garage. There was a fire pit, no grate, and the flames were going like this. And that's just kind of a, fire pit on top of the garage. Yes, a fire pit. I know. It was like a big pot with no back on it, and so it was totally open to any kind of wind, either from any direction. And of course, they've got plants on top there, they had kind of like 5 hedges up there. I mean, I just consider them to be something that's dangerous and needs to be, have more sensitive discussion at the Planning Commission or design traditions level than just okaying something over the counter without just checking out what the situation is around them. And there are quite a number in my neighborhood, and there are more sort of popping up. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. And they're generally, this one wasn't particularly massive, but generally they're quite massive, and they're in a way noise producing because people go out there, they take their wine, their yada yada, and they're out there till 11, 12 o'clock at night. And especially if there's an inn in the residential neighborhood, it's an issue. So,
Okay. Let me ask you something. So when I think of a fire pit, I think of maybe 2 different types of structures. One that would have gone through the process with the city, and a type that you just buy at Home Depot, or like a barbecue, where basically it's like the procession is barbecue for cooking and fire pit. You might cook on the fire pit. These are things that are all over the counter almost.
Permanent versus it's like
temporary,
installed,
right, installed versus
One requires
purchased.
plumbing, one doesn't.
So I assume, unless the council and legislators decide not to allow barbecues and purchasable fire pits, that is off the table for our discussion. There's nothing we can do about that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, from a design perspective, that's correct. But even those portable ones, the fire code and the building code have requirements about how close they can be to structures, the type, like you have to use a UL listed propane tank, have to be in good repair, you can't burn things that aren't meant to be burnt in them. So there's rules around them, but not from a design perspective. They're more code enforcement related.
So, for example, this one on the roof, I'm assuming might have been a built-in structure, but if it wasn't, okay. So it was just sitting there.
Just a plot.
Right. So that is not in our purview. Sadly, not sadly, I don't know. But a fire pit that would go through review at the city level would be in our purview. If we cannot ban temporary structures as a design committee, I mean, maybe the city can, I don't know. But then the question is, I mean, you could argue, I could argue, and I'm not trying to advocate for these at all, but I could argue that a permanent structure has an opportunity to be more safely handled, because it's going to be out of different materials, it's going to be pass review in terms of its distances from things, et cetera. So I think our question to ourselves is, we can't ban the purchasable ones. Is there something we can do about the permanent ones that helps mitigate the things you're talking about? And maybe the answer is no. But from a design standpoint, we could take a similar stance that I was describing for the trash enclosures, that they have to do with the architecture, but in terms of design, the safety part, I assume, is taken care of in the fire regs, and when they are reviewed through the staff, the distances and the heights and the smoke and the plumbing is all handled outside of this document. So I think the question to the table is, and to all of us is, yes, it's a hazard, it's a nuisance in many cases, but what can we do from a design standpoint to mitigate at least the ones that are permanent for now? And maybe they'll all be banned some days, who knows? But any thoughts on that? I mean, again, you're posing the problem. I'm not saying you have the solution. I mean, the table may or may not be able to come up with a solution.
I just want a discussion of it, because
Yeah.
it seems to me that when we're talking about fire protection and all the time that has been spent on the fire department coming and having that community meeting that they had a few months ago, and fire prevention and everything, that living in a forest is not a smart place to be having a lot of open fires. And not everything is properly, let's put it this way, properly built. I mean, things are kind of done because people want them, and if the city's told them no, the only way that there's going to be any dealing with it is if somebody complains about it,
So let me ask maybe Don and other designer types at the table. Don, I'm coming for you. I'm asking you if you have any design thoughts about permanent fire structures. What principles would you apply if you were trying to get them? I mean, again, safety is really not our purview, but maybe the aesthetics can work sort of toward that.
Well, don't know about the aesthetics, but I think it's already been discussed. Separation, distances from property lines and all that sort of thing. Concealment out of sight. Concern about prevailing winds, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So that could be a question for the table. Is there something we want to discuss about the location? So I know, for example, let's say you have a house that's behind the setback line. In other words, you have room between your house and the setback line from the front. Should you be allowed to have a fireplace? I think some people probably do. Some older buildings, I don't know. But is that something? Like, location is safety related, but it's also design related. I think that's one question for the table. Another question for the table might be, do we care whether it's an architecturally integrated structure, or is it something we think it'd be perfectly fine for it to be an art piece that is separate and different, distinct, like sculptural, different from the architectural piece? I'm just going to treat it as a sort of survey open question, because otherwise can't think of any other design issues that relate to a permanent fire structure other than the safety things that we don't have purview over. So does anyone at the table have any thoughts about that?
I don't have any answers. I think it's an interesting subject, but I would prefer that they could be designed, as you had suggested, as just an art piece, something different from the house. But at the same time, if it's a big enough thing, then it is going to have a participation in the design of the house and the character of the house. So I think that at least we should be able to say something about that and not have somebody be able to say, that's not your purview, so I get to do a steel ball with a, so I think we should be able to say something about it. With the whole fire pit question, I have friends that have these outdoor fire pits, but some of them they're like it's in a barbecue with an open front. So you can see the fire, you can cook marshmallows in it, but it's got a chimney and it's got a spark arrestor on it, which we're required to have spark arrestors on I think our regular chimneys. Isn't that right, Brandon? So for fire control, Melanie's got a very good point. Fire is becoming a worse problem as we go. And so that concerns me. We've got all these open fire, but at the same time, they're so wonderful outside at night. I hate to just say no to them. So, yeah. But I was thinking something that contains the fire more than an open pit, but still, if you look at the fireplaces at the Forge and the Forest General Store, you've got 4 columns and a roof, or a brick roof over it, and you see through the side, but it's available to everybody around. You can't force people to do that, but I'm just, yeah. Yeah.
I just wanted to agree with you, because we talked about suitability in the past, and that is subjective, but that's what the Planning Commission or the Design Review Board is for. But if we say that it needs to be suitable for the rest of the architecture, then it leaves it open for people that can interpret it.
One other thought was gas, and I know that there's been a movement to eliminate gas, fire stoves and so forth, and I think most custom fire pits use gas. So I don't know what's coming down the line in that regard, but at least we have apparently present codes to keep the fires from spreading, hopefully. I'm kind of for less regulation if possible on things. So in that regard, I would hate to say, don't do this, don't do that. Thank you.
Can I add? Yeah. So just to get everyone up to speed, so the Planning Commission, at least for the time that I've been here, they have not been approving wood-burning fireplaces outside. So for some time, they have not been approving wood-burning fireplaces outside. So only gas fire pits. So any fire pits that come across either the city desk, like if it's just a simple design study, like there's a good example literally across the street from City Hall, there's a fire pit that's going in there. They put it in. It was within the 15-foot front setback. They didn't know they needed a permit, so we said, guess what, you get to do it again. Try number 2. Let's move it back outside the 15 front setback. But it didn't have to go to Planning Commission. But same at our level, we don't permit because that policy has been said. It's not been written yet, but I anticipate that because we're going through the Community Wildfire Protection Program, Chief Panholzer is going to be making a presentation not this month, but next month, with the outcome of that survey and what the next steps are. And because the city's going to be amending its safety element of its general plan as part of the housing element update, we're going to see more regulations about fires, both indoors and outdoors. Maybe even to the extent that fire pits outside, propane or gas or wood or otherwise, maybe not be allowed, because it's still a fire that's outside, and just because the gas can't go up in flames doesn't mean something can't fall in the fire and then create an ember. So stay tuned for that. But right now the policy is we do not allow wood burning fireplaces outside. Indoor fireplaces are still allowed to be wood burning, but as Neil pointed out, the building code and fire code require you to have a spark arrestor and a chimney that is inspected and healthy.
Patio heaters don't get into this?
No.
Patio heater. Yeah. That's not yet. So, so it seems to me, from what I'm hearing around the table, is that really there's the sense is, at least I'm paraphrasing Neil now, that it'd be nice to just have it on the radar for consideration of the Planning Commission. Now, of course, you could argue it's already on the radar, they're going to see a plan, et cetera, but I think Neil may be advocating for just adding a line that says, to the extent that there are any permanent fire pits, make sure they're compatible and compatible could mean either integrated or a sculptural art piece, et cetera. But basically just a line that says, hey, Planning Commission, take a look at the fire pit if there's one there. Don't think of it as something you don't need to look at. I don't know. This is just adding a line. It's a little bit, isn't there not much teeth to it? It's kind of like a flag from what but nobody's in the mood, and I don't disagree, to, you know, overly regulate it in sort of an aesthetic way, as long as someone looks at it and says, you know, that is not terrible looking. That is not.
The commission can say something.
They can now, but what we're saying is, I think what you're saying is maybe we just flag it and say, please look at it. What is that? How does? Oh.
If we're going to put something in, you know, so I'm kind of with Carol, like the more rules you have, if you don't want a rule to be enforced, just add 20, and, you know, that'll be sure to do it. You know, too many rules is not really going to help after a point. But so if we did want to write something, I would write it more as permanent structures have to comply with blah, 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 and not just point to fire pits. Like, I'm not even sure that any of us can name a problem that we've had in the community with ugly fire pits. I think our concern would entirely be, hey, we live in a forest and California's been on fire for the last 10 years. You know, that's the problem. And actually the fact that you can't have wood burning would actually be, that would be my biggest concern, because that's where the sparks come from. But I think from our rules perspective, I would rather make something that's just generic on built structures rather than pointing at the fire pit, because then you got to point at every other thing that someone might choose to build in their yard, and then you just have a bunch of rules that no one's going to enforce.
Okay, Don.
I hate to suggest adding a level of bureaucracy, but is there any way we could have fire pits pass by some fire authority?
That'd make me feel a lot better.
So if they're constructed, if they're the type that we're talking about that has plumbing, they have to get a building permit. So our building department goes out and does the inspection to make sure that gas lines are connected properly, and they do all the tests and everything like that. So in that respect, they're kind of one and the same, because the building department uses any fire codes related to fire pits, but the most important and dangerous part of it is actually the plumbing, where the gas is being connected to the fire pit for those CAS ones. But I don't know if you're asking about an annual inspection. There's no annual inspections or anything like that. The location is set by the building code and the fire code, which talks about how far the fire producing device needs to be from a structure. And then we already have, because it is considered a structure, it's regulated by our structure setbacks already. So you've got 3 feet on the sides, 15 feet on the front, on the rear setback. So that's the first step.
Am I allowed to build a well-plumbed? Am I allowed to build a well-plumbed fire pit directly under my Monterey pine?
No.
All right, so now my final question maybe for Brandon, which is, what do you think about just adding, maybe, again, we're building on this, but sort of a la David's thought, you know, permanent accessory structures such as fire pits, such as patio, and, you know, other patio, you know, should be looked at as, you know, being compatible and suitable to the building. That's okay? It doesn't bother you to add it? Okay. So it's a flag, basically. And we'll decide where to put it later. I'm not quite sure right now. To me, the thing that's much more obvious of where to put it is the trash enclosure thing, because I already, apparently it's already in here at 3.5.1. So under 3.5.0, we say 3.5.0 is minimize negative impacts to surrounding properties. That's the general principle, under which 3.5.1 says fully integrate utilities and services, including gas meters, electric panels, water heaters, and trash receptacles into the architectural design of the building. So we already did say that. I think you might have raised it, Melanie, not to put words in your mouth, because if it's not integrated, oh, here it says, in cases where full architectural integration is not possible, eliminate the visual impacts of utilities, it says, but we could edit that to be more general, by grouping and shield them with architectural and landscape elements such as cabinets, walls, fences, or plantings, or integrated material and color. Now, certainly 3.5.2 could add trash receptacles there. I think the question for the group is there more to say about trash receptacles? I think they can be, we have a huge, here, I'll just, one quick pet peeve from the chair. I cannot believe that people cannot remember to keep their trash receptacles where they belong, since we are paying through the nose to have, you and I are all paying through the nose to have our folks go back in the backyard or the side yard, pick them up, but nonetheless, my entire street rolls everything out to the curb. and so the guys they don't get to do the extra service, and they put them back there. So all day trash day, all the trash cans are out, even though all of us have paid way more than normal trash service to not go through that. So I don't get it, and I don't know if we can put it here, but that's, the question to the group is, have we covered what we want to do about trash enclosures with that caveat of making sure that we don't limit it to utilities in 3.5.2, or do we want to say more about it?
I don't know why, but I got a lot of stuff in my head about trash enclosures because it never gets settled. But would it be possible to find out from the trash company, how do we locate a trash can so that you can easily get to it? And then make that a part of the statement. The reason why we're asking you to design your trash enclosure this way is so that you don't have to roll out your cans.
The other architect in the room? I'm picking on you today. Thoughts on how is your trash arranged, Don? I'll tell you about my trash.
I'm a guilty party. I always put mine out because I've learned that the company will pick them up selectively. They'll pick up some and not the others. Now, that's something to enforce with with contract. Well, I'm raising the question.
Just because I work at the city doesn't.
How do we get green waste to do their job fully?
Somebody's got to remind them. I think one of the biggest problems, it's not just the current residents, it's the absentees. It's a huge problem because the gardeners come out on a particular day, and it's not necessarily the day that they're picking up the trash. The trash cans are out for 2, 3, sometimes 4 days around where I live, and there's nobody there to monitor these things. So I think there are a couple of problems. One is the city needs to notify residents that we don't need to put our stuff out. I mean, mine are behind a large fence and gate and so forth, and so they come and pick up mine and they put them away, and sometimes they close the gate, sometimes they don't. But the point is they don't do that for everybody in the neighborhood. They only do it for some. You're right, Don, and it's very selective, and so I think that's an issue, but that isn't one that we can necessarily solve. It's got to be another thing that the city has to inform people about, because not all residents or homeowners, let's just put it that way, property owners understand that. And then the other thing is that for many, 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 many years, the city has required trash enclosures. And that's not always enforced in the design of a property. And I think that we have to start doing that because, down in my area, it ends up looking like Watts because you've got all this garbage and stuff, out at the curb for days on end, and it's all now not always in the trash receptacles. And it just makes Carmel look trashy,
That's good. That's a good punchline. Oh, Doug.
Madam Chair, are you saying that 3.52 already is inclusive of trash receptacle?
We have to add a word.
Right, about them, because this looks like it just refers to utilities. Okay.
Back to the utilities and services, which is what we used in the paragraph before. Here's a thought from our discussion. Just like the fire pit discussion, I am come to understand, and I think, again, this is Neil's suggestion, that we need to say something targeted about trash enclosures that's separate from what we have here, like a flag, again, to the Planning Commission, but also to the applicants. And so if Brandon doesn't object, I think the idea of you ready?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
The idea of saying, locate the trash enclosures in such a way that they are both concealed from surrounding properties, but also provide access for the backyard service or the side yard service, so that as someone is designing their property, they actually get that moment of education of like, oh, the trash service is actually different in Carmel than where I came from. So I actually think it, unless Brandon objects, a separate paragraph in this same area, which is 3.5.0, minimize negative impacts to surrounding properties, a call out for why, this is to Don's point, why, do's, don'ts, and whys, some phrasing that just says, so that the service folks can get to them and return them when they do their rounds. Now, that doesn't mean that later someday we won't have that service, but still it will be nice to have that.
That was my one suggestion was going to be.
But I think that still, it's so that they can get there, but if they're not coming, that's also good. It's fine as long, it'll work either way, but go ahead.
Yeah, as long I think the first time you said it, in the side or rear. Like I would say that the only thing I wouldn't put in there. I like the idea, but just don't put in the location. Just say, so that the trash company can pick it up as, required under their contract with the city or whatever. Just leave it more open-ended.
And so that they
People know that there's a special place they're supposed to keep their trash though.
So they can remain concealed during service days, this sort of thing. So we don't want to wordsmith it right this second, but it's concealed and accessible.
Yeah, I think we got it. But also, to Don's point, it makes me want to go to the trash company and say, why are you picking up some of them in the yard and some of them not? What makes the difference for you? So that we know what is causing them to not go onto the property. And then they might say, well, it's too far back, or we can't see it, or whatever. Maybe we could use that as part of this lesson.
Well, and I will say that my sense is that sometimes they get in the habit of, my husband and I had a big conversation about this topic yesterday, where our across the street neighbor, who always rolls it out, inadvertently rolled all the cans back before all three were picked up. And yet, because the guys were good that day on my block, they went looking for a can to check why it wasn't out and whether it was empty. And they found the can in the back, brought it forward, emptied it, and put it back in the back, which was great. So I think a lot of it's about habit and which guys there, and also when people are rolling the stuff out, sometimes the assumption is if they didn't roll it out, then they might not want service this time. So I think it's all education. Our little part that we can do is to get it into the design guidelines so that at least the new folks are educated. I think that's a nice idea.
Another thing that's an issue, on some of the small lots where they're doing remodels, it is not easy to establish a location. And so oftentimes, people need to come into the public right-of-way. Like, the fence is here, and instead of doing a lot of landscaping right there, there is a spot created for a trash receptacle, and then some landscaping on either side of it or whatever. But we're assuming that everything's like new construction around here, and it's not. Most of everything that's done is pretty much remodeling of some sort or another. And so I think we have to, pay attention to the people who either currently have a small lot and no place on their private property to put it, but they could easily locate it against a fence or in some landscaping that's on the public right-of-way. So if that has to be an exception, I think we should be willing to consider that.
I think that's a really good point. Brandon's whispering to me on the side after I asked him, of course, you cannot do that in the right of way, but you can get an encroachment permit. So if it is a renovation and there's absolutely no way to fit a can in the 3 feet and actually get to it, then you would apply for an encroachment permit. I think that's worth saying here too. Is that okay? Okay, good. So these are really, really good topics. Any other final thoughts on trash enclosures? I feel like we've made a very, yeah.
How many cans are we supposed to have?
I think most people have 3. I have a neighbor who has 4 because they have 2 green barrels. I think you can have as many as you like, but you just have to pay for them.
Okay.
But most people have 3. They don't let you not have a garbage can. I now have a teeny weeny garbage can, the very smallest that they'll let me. I mean, it's not any much cheaper, but just because we never fill it up because we're always recycling. So you have to have the little guy, the little black guy, in order to have the others. They don't let you out of it. And apparently you're just paying for the little trash can, and then the other stuff comes with it. But I think you can also pay for extras. Okay, this is good. Any other, is this, I think that,
Nope.
you don't want to do that? You don't want to do this next? Because I feel like this is more,
You're the chair. Do what you want.
I mean, this is next meeting stuff.
Yeah, these are just sure.
Okay.
Because of the way the agenda was written, I had to put it under
Oh.
cleanup items. So you can.
All right, Emily, let me adjust a little bit here. So just because I think this is more related to design, and we're doing these sort of design cleanup, I want to introduce this next topic, and then Brandon's going to expand on it. Yeah.
This is agenda item number 5B.
Yeah. Well, that's what Brandon's saying. He says he's putting approach for the upcoming photo shoot meeting. Unless there are other design issues that are springing to mind. Do you have some, Doug? Okay, then we should do them now. Sure. Okay.
So this is a list that we received or made up on March 31st. So let's just see what we...
Yeah, we did, but maybe you have some...
Well, municipal design guidelines,
Oh, yeah.
compounds. I don't think we addressed compounds. Okay. Downsizing incentives, preservation incentives, multi-lot buildings downtown, existing and new single-family downtown versus mixed use.
That is a zoning code thing that Brandon said
Okay.
on top of.
This is, residential and commercial maximum building envelopes.
Residential, we have.
Okay. We did view, purview, faux versus man-made materials and authentic, color.
We had that talk.
Okay. Images is on the agenda, background context, enforcement processes to come, DRBs at the council, or was it the council, dark skies, skylights, driveway gates. I don't think it is. I don't think it is. Okay.
Yeah, I think that,
Driveway gates ended up. I think where the conversation went on the driveway gates was treating them like the gates, a gate, where it needs to be open and transparent, and it shouldn't be the first choice. I do know, I remember that we talked about it, though, for sure.
I'd like to go back and check that one. I don't know if I can do it here on the fly and get through it, but I'm going to make a note to self to see where we ended up with that, because I think we wanted to, if I recall the discussion, it was along the lines of like certain properties on really busy corners you could have some sympathy for, but in general we don't want them because it's it's ridiculous. I think we have something about estate properties or something like that. I think that's where it is.
If you're gonna have one, it needs to be, and if you're gonna have one, it needs to be open, and it's not, you're not walling off the driveway.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing that up. Don?
Sorry to show my ignorance, are we going to get a draft with a lot of these items that discuss, maybe eventually incorporated? So we haven't seen that draft yet. When is that coming?
Well, I think, as you might know, as sort of the secretary role here that I've been playing for this core part, every time something is like a round of modification goes through, it has a date on it, it gets released, it gets put on this website archive thing. Personally, I would never change anything without distributing it or updating it, and we don't really have that many changes since this went to council. Little things here and then, like what we're discussing today. And to me, next time we do something more, this is just my suggestion, next time we do something a little more impactful, like look at the full sandwich or get into the photos or whatever, then it would have a round of edits. These are going to be minor edits, but I don't think it's worth releasing something for a couple words, et cetera, yet. There's not been any major changes to the language since this went to council in what month? What was that? I don't remember.
I don't remember.
A few months ago.
3-4 months ago.
Yeah.
May maybe,
Yeah. So this is the May 26th draft right here that I'm looking at. It only has red marks from today on it so far.
What are we going to do about municipal guidelines?
Yes, good question. The Muni guidelines that, I think that, I don't want to put words in Brandon's mouth. I think if, I personally would like to see the council see it at some point as a concept, because that hasn't even been like raised to them really yet as a concept, has it?
Yeah, you and I talked about this a little bit, one of our agenda planning meetings. So if you remember, the last time we went to council, we got a few pieces of pretty clear direction. One was the December thing that I mentioned earlier. And the other one was that we needed to follow the scope of work, the Norrie Winter scope of work that was launched at the very beginning of this process. And the municipal guidelines are not on there. It's a very, very valuable project. I think we all agree with that. But in order to get to a December product, we're gonna put the municipal guidelines on sort of a work plan. So we need to finish the task at hand, the actual design guidelines, and get those to a point where we have a finished document. Like Victoria said, the council hasn't blessed or signed off on us creating a third set of guidelines, and that would be over and above that original scope of work that we got direction for last time to finish, basically. So that's where we're at on the municipal guidelines.
I would take a different perspective. If we look at the residential guidelines 1.20 throughout 1.30, they talk about the public right-of-way. In the commercial guidelines, 1.10, 1.21 talks about the right-of-way. I think they are part of the contract with Norrie. If we want to enhance the guidelines, that's fine, but I think this is part of our work.
Well, I think, yeah. Just to play devil's advocate now on that point, I think you could argue that it's a formatting question, really, and that the reason people have appealed to people this idea of separating the Muni guidelines is that some of the stuff we're asking residents to do is really not in their purview. We're mentioning it in the residential guidelines, but it kind of doesn't belong there. I mean, some of it you want them to be aware of, but some of it, like, I don't know, street gutters, there's no frickin' way they're ever going to be doing the street gutters. So just putting it almost on, in a holding pattern in that other chapter at the very least. I personally think that without developing it, I think it might be wise, without doing the work, because I don't think it should be something that is distracting from the main thing that we're trying to get done by December, but to have a repository of the stuff that is Muni guideline related, that is not require any extra effort at this point, so that at the December thing we can say, and by the way, we've decided that we would prefer to format this so that the stuff that residents can't take care of is in a separate chapter. So I think it's almost like a hybrid idea, but I do agree, Doug, that if we're presenting something in December, I think it would be an appropriate time to show where it could head with the Muni thing, even if it's not ready in full sense. I think that might be like a little compromise there. I don't know, but for more discussion.
I kind of have a question about how this is going to be processed. If we do put it off like that, which I think is reasonable, for workload and all that kind of stuff, are we at that point? Is the council maybe going to say, okay, well, you're done, steering committee, and you're not going to have any more work to do on the commercial? And that's a concern for me, because I'll tell you, this whole process started for me with the pit. And I was appalled at what had been approved. And I went back and looked at all of the meetings, and it was ridiculous. They did not have any reasonable way for not allowing Pastor's first project. And the first one just went through like a breeze. And that's fine. That's their decision, and I respect that. But that's why I got involved. All of the little houses and stuff like that, I love people to have their diversity and do all their fun little things and stuff. But I want to participate because it's important to other people that I care about. But if we don't get to the commercial, I'm going to be very frustrated at some point. Municipal codes. Oh, never mind.
Sorry, don't. Yeah, you don't have to.
Doug's like, he's making like, oh, he's not even talking about what I'm talking about.
No. This.
Had an advocate.
Hello. Wait. Oh, yeah, we're still here.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Sorry. That was. It does sound weird. Municipal sounds like city, but it really is right of way. I mean, maybe we might have to relabel it. I don't know. But no, commercial's going there. I think what Brandon is worried about, and I agree, is that there's enough to do between now and December that to sort of perfect a good rough draft for the Muni part. The right-of-way part it wouldn't be maybe the top priority, but I guess my vote at the moment is I do want it to be shown as an option, as something the formatting we prefer, and not hide it in December.
Yeah, if I could, Melanie, is that okay? Thank you. Yeah, and I agree 100%. Like I'm on board with the concept too. I know what we need to do. I don't want to have to go through the municipal code. So the Muni, the streets and right-of-way, I don't know what to call it now. The streets and right-of-way version is actually a third set of design guidelines, kind of going back through everything that we've done, beating up the language. And I know it would be a little bit easier because we've kind of smoothed the process, but still, we need to get the actual job we were assigned by the city council across the finish line. And I agree with what Doug said, that a lot of the stuff in the residential and the commercial, it does reference those areas, but we would still be creating something from new cloth. We'll be pulling things in from other documents that exist. We'd be perfecting that language to see if maybe it's out of date. Maybe some of the materials that are referenced in like the streets diagrams and the types of pavers, maybe those are the wrong pavers. There's a lot of work to do to create a third set of guidelines rather than what we're doing now. And I agree, for these two, the commercial and the residential has been largely formatting and like reorganizing versus creating a new third set of guidelines. I do agree with you that I think it would be wise in December, or maybe, even before, if we end up doing a touch base before then, to float that concept and say, hey, we've got this small work plan that we've talked about, like these, the documents, the guiding documents and the checklists and things like that, they're going to come on the heels of this. This third set of guidelines is something we as a committee think is important too and would be beneficial to the community, and we'd like to keep working on that. Yeah,
I mean, I think this may not satisfy you, Doug, but I think if if there is a preview at least of that to come, and even in its skeletal form, even just a title page or, right, right, then I would be, as long as there's a sense that this is the work plan and we're going to make sure that it eventually reaches the same level as these things, if it's not fully done in December, I'm okay, as long as it's not hidden and it's previewed and it's, they get a chance to,
I think we even take it so far as to suggest that we
Yeah.
keep working on it.
Yeah.
Not just to preview it.
yeah.
We're recommending we keep working on this.
I mean, to me, I don't see, since we're in September, I don't see how we can get it to this level. That's my concern. But I agree with Doug that it needs to be shown and sort of previewed and suggested, et cetera, so that, and even presented with a chapter heading or something. Consider it the third chapter. It's a reformatting and a pulling out. But then I think Brandon is also correct that there's a lot of stuff that we have not looked at yet that, I mean, even the drawings themselves are so primitive, you know, that they're really old diagrams. I'm not disparaging the old. It's oldie but goodies, but you know, they're not traditional.
Better than old.
They're not ready, they're not in the same even graphic language that we're using here. So I think the opportunity is tremendous to bring it all up to date. But I think it is a large project that we haven't started yet. So were you going to say something, Melanie?
I share Doug's concern. I think you guys, what I see with the forest master plan and what we're trying to do and what Public Works is doing, we're concerned about aesthetics and, you know, that kind of thing. They're not concerned with that at all. They are concerned with let's get the job done. And it's an engineering approach as opposed to an artistic, aesthetic approach. And what I'm scared to death of, you guys, is if we put this off, what's going to happen is there's going to end up a conflict between the forest master plan and what their purview is, and what we perceive as to what our purview is and what is appropriate for our aesthetically driven community.
It's true.
And
it's the forest. You're right.
yeah, and so if we don't nail down what we see is appropriate for Carmel, and I think most of us agree with what has been the traditional approach to the right-of-way and the streetscape, then we're probably going to lose it down the line, because I noticed that some members of the council were never with this program in the beginning, and are fairly negative every single time we open our mouths, and we elicit long diatribes about our work and so forth. So I think it's naive, and that's not meant insultingly, you guys, please, but it's, I can't think of another word to describe it, that to think that we're going to have another slice at the pie. And that's what worries me about the landscape ordinance too, is that, you know, if we don't somehow elicit the support from the council for some additional work in these endeavors, much of what we've placed our hopes on are not going to happen. I mean, that's just politics. And so, plus we're having an election next year, and, you know, we don't want our work to become part of, you know, that either. And so my feeling is that I totally understand what you two are saying, but I just want you to understand what I'm saying, and I think Doug has some of the same concerns probably that I've stressed. So is there some way that in what we're doing that we can make a stronger statement about what we expect in the public right-of-way? Can we be a little more definitive in terms of what we want there, so that if we don't get another slice at the pie, we've got something there that's strong enough that it will support what we've been talking about for over a year and a half?
Can Doug, I'm going to give the mic to Doug in a second. First of all, I want to, you're absolutely right, Melanie, to point out that the right-of-way guidelines, let's call them at the moment, are the essence of the forest piece. They do not address how the forest weaves through private property, which is also very important. We're not just doing strips of forest along the roads. We are requiring folks to bring the forest into their lot and pack through the back of the lot. But you're right that that is a place that really, the muni or right-of-way guidelines would be the place that would really emphasize and counteract possible dangers that you're pointing out earlier today. So I completely agree with you. I do think it's important. I think all we're talking about is what is the state of finish going to be at in December. I think that's all we're talking about. I think that Brandon has acknowledged, Doug has expressed to Brandon that December cannot be a final. There will not be a final in December. And as long as that's the case, then the muni stuff will be ongoing beyond that. I think that's what Brandon is saying.
I feel like what we need to have in December is a product, like homework. We need to hand in our homework in December to start the process of going through the Planning Commission, the City Council, and start talking about adoption. I truly don't believe that if we were to start right now to finish the third set of design guidelines, we would get there. And my fear with that would be we would show up in December without our homework, and the City Council would say, we told you December, you didn't even do the homework we told you, and you tried to add something else to it. We're just pulling the plug on this thing altogether. And that could happen too. I mean, I hear what you're saying. You're concerned about turning this in and saying, okay, now we want to keep working on the third set of design guidelines. But what I would offer, in my experience is I'm trying to get a finished product to them in December like they asked us to, and then be able to say, look, we did it. We did what you told us to. It's a really good product. Let us keep going, because now you can see we can do a good product. So my worry with not showing up in December with a finished product is that the whole plug gets pulled altogether. That's where my head's at on this. And so I'm trying to manage to the timeline that we got from them.
So I would propose that the chair appoint a subcommittee to work on the right-of-way guidelines, and that we take whatever form they're in to the council in December with the hope that we can be extended to work on it. I think to leave them out is like reading Churchill's volumes on World War II and missing 2 volumes. This is a vital part of our work. Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
So as much as I love you, Doug, don't take this the wrong way, but I don't think that's what you guys should do. This is advice. You guys can end up doing what you want. But one of the things that I've heard from City Council is that the steering committee wasn't set up to write guidelines. So I think that if the steering committee were to appoint a subcommittee to write a whole set of design guidelines outside of public meetings, outside of them being vetted through city staff, I think that might send the wrong message, but that's just my advice. You guys can do as you wish, but I think that may be the wrong approach to try to write them on the side of this project and then show up with them effectively completed by a subcommittee in December and say that this is a subcommittee of 2 that wrote these guidelines.
Well, I think we maybe have a language issue here. I don't think it's possible for a subcommittee to write guidelines, period. I just don't think that's possible. To come up with you could argue that the little chapter that we have framed out is something that could be presented already as a framework for what I think it's possible. You could have a subcommittee that, tidies that up and says, and here's a box where we would add, stuff from Public Works, and here's things that need. It's basically a marked up copy of, this is what we want. This is the beginning of what this project would be. I personally don't see. I'm happy to take a vote right now for a subcommittee. I would be happy to serve on a subcommittee, but I agree with Brandon that it's not going to, we can't do what we've done here in the time.
My point was less about can't do. I feel pretty strongly that you shouldn't do. I mean, even to some extent, what Doug created for the first draft was done I don't know who else you worked with, if you worked with anyone else on the,
I was doing typesetting or whatever.
okay, so there was already a subcommittee created that wrote a draft basically outside of this process. So I think to continue working on that is a little fraught. But again, just my advice, as staff to this committee, I don't think that was the charge that we got from the city council to have 2 members go off and write a third set of design guidelines.
I think that's the wrong word, right. I really do. I think all that happened so far, seriously, is a formatting exercise where stuff that was showing up in this, where we had as a group made the decision that it was not appropriate for it to remain only there, where residents could not actually execute the things we were asking them to execute. So when this group decided, we would like to see, everybody unanimously thought it was a great idea, and I think you do too, Brandon, to have the stuff that the city takes care of just be under a different chapter heading. It's not really, what you're talking about is a more ambitious thing, which I think is great.
There were several things that were new writing.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not aware of that. I think that the reformatting was to take stuff from residential and commercial, make sure that it goes to the group that is responsible for executing it. And if I recall, and I'll go look at it again, the only other thing that was added was documents that we had been given as a committee earlier in the process that had to do with curb details and things, and they were just pasted in as well. I am not aware of any language additions, subtractions, they can't subtract, the document didn't exist before, modifications, just a collection of stuff that residences and businesses cannot influence, actually, except as voting citizens. So I don't think it's possible, I agree with you, Brandon, for anyone on this committee all by themselves to write guidelines without this legitimate public process that we've done for everything. I don't think anyone would try. So the question is there some kind of framework or formatting or preview or something that can just be assembled without that public process, without any kind of language composition that might be useful? And Don has his finger up, and so do I. Don't know remember who's first.
Right there, something we've already done, or something. What are we talking about? We're talking about something kind of a placeholder.
A placeholder, exactly.
Where is that? Do we have a draft of that, or what?
We do have that.
Where is it?
I don't know, it's on the website, it's something we looked at a lot.
Okay, so it's not in this material.
No.
Yeah, I'm really lost.
Can somebody put that together for us so we can see, even if it's just a list of pages?
It's on the
It's
website.
something that Doug created and brought to this group. It's not something the city has had any part in.
Oh,
It's just a reformatting of stuff from the residential guide. It's cutting and pasting the residential stuff that does not apply to residents, and cutting and pasting documents that were given to this committee a long time ago that have to do at the beginning of this process, that have to do with curb,
Public works
signage, drainage, all stuff that's in the sidewalk zone. And that's just sitting there waiting for someone to work on. It has not been worked on. It's just we like the idea of a unique chapter. So
Yeah, I'm totally lost because Doug went through this checklist earlier, and you said yes, yes, yes. But where is all that stuff? If we've worked on them or have a draft, where's the draft?
you've seen it before, Don. Everybody's been issued it before, but it's been many, many meetings. We haven't talked about it in a long time. It's also always on the website, steeringcommittee.universe, always there.
Okay,
And it's sitting there
Is it
with
under
its
what
original, it probably says uni guidelines, it says the date. Yeah, the date it was discussed in.
I get lost when you use the word formatting. It's the content I'm after. And you say it's going to be there.
There's no content that's new. It's just content that this group came up with for the residential.
But it's not showing up yet.
It's on the website, it has been
Right.
given to you all before. I
but
don't remember when,
why
it's
is
been
it
a long time.
problematic then? I don't get, I
It's
mean,
problematic.
if we've already got it laid out, we've already discussed it, I don't understand why we can't just put that, together to ship up to them in December, and then.
I think
and
that's
then-
Brandon's suggestion.
Yeah, and then just, and then just say we'd like to finalize this or refine it or whatever, Brandon, is that workable?
Doug, I think, can we get Doug to, no? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, my whole point was, at one point, I think, and we've kind of gone all over, the suggestion was that there would be a subcommittee of the steering committee created to work on the third set of design guidelines that would be for the right-of-way, to literally put them together and work on them and then show up with a first draft. My point to that was, I feel pretty strongly, I don't think that was the direction that we got from city council, was that members of the steering committee should be creating things from cloth. It should be, the steering committee is presented with a draft. Like, we just went through this whole exercise of what we want the sandwich to look like on the design guidelines. So the city staff is going to work and create a draft to bring back to you all and get your feedback on. The thing with this third set of design guidelines, it would be something that was, whether it's, we use the word written or created or put together or whatever, it's something that is created by members of the steering committee out of the blue, 2 members on their own, not part of a public process. It's not even something that we got direction from city council to do as part of this project. So that's my concern, just as, you know, the staff member with the city, you know, what I'm hearing, I'm just offering that guidance, that I wouldn't recommend doing that. But again, you know, the steering committee is a separate body. You guys can do what you feel.
Doug, do you have some?
Brandon, I don't see much difference between 2 members of a committee drafting something to bring back for a public process and Nori Winter drafting something in Colorado and sending it back here for a public review. Well, but we were appointed. He was selected by the city. We were appointed. I think the comment you made about the council not authorizing us specifically to look at this is exactly what Melanie's concerned about. It's the death kill for the guidelines to go forward. We'll take this to the council in December, and they'll say, thank you, committee. We appreciate your work. And it's over. So we either roll the dice and take a chance, or we say it's over and write the date down and say it's finished.
Well, my perception is, Brandon, the way you explained it, seems like, well, it seems negative, and I think what we've tried to do, and I understand why you might feel that way because we've discussed this. My feeling is it wouldn't be like a couple of us who are, you know, very concerned about this, getting together and mocking up what we've already discussed and what's scattered around in our documents, and putting those in a more appropriately formatted situation, that we wouldn't bring them back. The understanding would be that maybe we wouldn't bring them back, we wouldn't discuss them. But I think what we've tried to do, honestly, and is through this entire process, is to make things more terse, more concise, and to get the concerns that everybody seems to have that talks to us or comes to the meetings or whatever, to get all of that somehow discussed and acknowledged, and then to put together a document that reflects all of this. Now, I don't see what Doug is saying perhaps the same way you do. I understand about the directional point of view. I totally understand that. But the concern, I've already expressed what my concern is politically and whatnot, but I don't understand why if 2 people take what's already, you know, been agreed to by all of us, and see if they can put that in some kind of format and show it to the council, because we might only have 1 or 2 people who aren't happy about it, but we might have a number of people who are, and who would appreciate and understand how what Doug's talking about and what we've put together, how they're an extension of each other and really should be part of that whole work product. And the only difference is that the Muni guidelines do not have quite as much refinement as what we're submitting to them in December. And we can just explain that, you know, this is what we think is very important. It's an extension of what we're doing. It's a more detailed understanding of what we're doing, so people don't have to sift through and find those things. But at least we get our foot in the door, and maybe like the design guidelines, we can get their agreement to say, well, we can continue to work on it after the December time frame. But that we've done it, you know, that two people have put together what we all have discussed and understand, and not something new and different.
I honestly do think we're having a communication issue here, not really a disagreement. Frankly, this is my opinion. I may be wrong, but I'm going to try to articulate it. In May 3rd is when everybody got this thing that I helped format. That Doug's original idea that everyone embraced. It's called here it says it's called the Public Design Guidelines. It's May 3rd draft. It was something that was shown at that meeting, whenever that meeting was. I mean, we know it was May 3rd, whenever that, you know, that was the time we had already discussed what a great idea to separate out stuff that residents and commercial owners cannot actually be responsible for, but that already exists in those two documents and other documents around the city. Wouldn't it be great for it all to be in one spot, nice and concise, as Melanie said? I mean, there may be, I cannot imagine that there's like much, if anything, that's new there that would have been something that was just a brainstorm during the transposing. I don't want to say categorically that couldn't have happened, but that certainly was not the intent. It was a collecting of stuff that doesn't have a place in residential and commercial and needs a new place. That is a formatting issue for me. Now, what Brandon's talking about, I believe, is the very hard work that is yet to come, maybe quite a bit of it from Public Works and other parts of the administration, of the staff, to look at what the heck these details are that it would be nice to have the public input on, but we have never looked at it, ever. And there's certainly no conjecture about that is authorized by reformatting it. So to me, personally, the only thing that we need to say to the council, either in December or prior, is, hey, we noticed that there was stuff in these other spots that doesn't belong there. And we've been in the process of doing major reformatting. That is what the community really wanted, was clean, concise, logical formatting so that things are easy to find, easy to enforce, et cetera. And we noticed that we needed another chapter in order to make that happen. It's another chapter heading in a design guideline. And here's what we have so far, the stuff that belongs in that chapter. We have not done any of the work that has to do with reviewing pavement patterns or curb details or whatever. We haven't refined it in any way because we haven't been assigned that project yet. But we have noticed that there's stuff in the wrong place and we want to put it in this chapter. And I personally believe that that should be shown December, before December, I don't care when. It's a great idea. Everybody loves it. We've done no work on it that's substantial. But at the very least, we should be showing the formatting intent that we expect, and then demonstrating how much work needs to be done. Whoever the council decides to assign it to, it needs to be done. The staff wants it to be done. The community wants it to be done. But I don't think that what's been done so far is actual work in that way. I don't think it's writing. I don't think it's work. I think it's categorizing into Chapter 3 the stuff that belongs in Chapter 3, extracting it from other places and putting it where it belongs.
Stop right there. Does Brandon have a problem with Chapter 3?
Does Brandon have a problem with Chapter 3?
In concept, no, but this is kind of my point, is that we've got 2 chapters that we have been assigned and we're trying to get done by December. we talked about this municipal third set of guidelines in concept, and it seemed like a very good concept. And then I believe at the meeting or two after that, Doug came with this draft here. We haven't spent any time looking at it, digesting it, letting anybody say for sure, I like what's in here or what's not in here. That's work that needs to be done still. So I'm not going to say 100% yes or no that I'm supportive or against Chapter 3. In concept, I like the idea of having a municipal set of guidelines, but we haven't done any work to look at what it does and whether or not when you pull stuff out of the commercial and residential design guidelines, if you somehow leave those naked by missing stuff that is interrelated with the private property or commercial property from the right-of-way. Maybe it makes sense to have it in there too, or only in there. So we haven't done it, which is in there right now. But if we were to strip that out of there and put it in a third chapter, what does that do to those other two chapters? Does it somehow weaken those? We don't know that because we haven't had these long conversations. And my bigger point with all this is that we spent 30 minutes now almost talking about this topic. So imagine if we try to actually do something with this to get it to a point where all 5 of you and myself feel comfortable floating it up to the city council saying, here's a concept. That's going to take some time at this table. And every minute we spend at this table working on the third chapter takes away from us getting our other homework done, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. So that's my big concern here, is that we're spending time on something that probably has a lot of merit and I think is a really good project. But I worry that we went to council, they told us, look, get your poop in a group. Let's get it back to us in December. And I worry that we might be shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit, but for a good reason. Like, I get that. I don't want to discount how good of an opportunity this is to do this. My job in this, of the 6 of us, is to keep us moving forward, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Doug's original proposal, which was to appoint a subcommittee. I think it's possible that we could appoint a subcommittee that does not trod on the territory that Brandon is worried about. And if the subcommittee would like to do that, I'm completely open to it. And I think, I'm completely open to hearing, doesn't matter whether I'm open to it. Anybody here is welcome to make a motion to appoint a 2-person subcommittee and of course, to be completely transparent and open with Brandon and check in, and we thought we might just do this, is that okay? But not to write things that cannot be done in private and must be part of a public and must get perhaps but buy-in and exposure to the folks that are up on the dais. So I am happy to entertain that motion if anyone wants to make it. It seemed to me that was the majority view here from just the discussion. So I don't want to ever think of myself as cutting that off. So happy to do it, happy to support the motion if somebody wants to make it. Doug, you brought it up.
I move that the chair appoint 2 members to work on pulling together the public aspect of the residential and commercial design guidelines.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, there's a second. So let's have a vote. We have at least 2 votes. Don, you might be the tiebreaker. Do you want 2 of your colleagues to just at least explore this? That's right. I'm picking on you today, Don, because you look so fresh and summery.
Well, I share Brandon's notion of kind of something, except if we can slip all this material in with what we've got, I'm all for it. But I'm against maybe a Chapter 3.
Oh, well, that's a new one. Okay. Do you want your colleagues to look at it? Do you want 2 of your colleagues to look at the issue of what we might, how we might introduce the topic of a third chapter to the council?
Doug's motion was to actually create them, right?
Well, a subcommittee to work on it. Now, I don't know what work on it means, and I think that would be for the subcommittee to decide. So do you want 2 of your colleagues to meet independently and think about this and talk about it and decide what to do or what to present as a draft? Can't object to that. Okay. So we have at least 3 votes in favor of 2 of the, and I will think about who to appoint later, since that authority has been given to me by the motion. Okay. So That's,
What is the outcome of the subcommittee?
the outcome
What's
is that
subcommittee's
the
task? Let's
subcommittee,
make it really clear.
the
What's
subcommittee will
subcommittee's
look at a third chapter and what to present to the council. Is that right?
task? Does look at mean take what Doug, you borrow that?
Yeah.
So just so we're clear, I just want to be 100% sure, because we've shot ourselves in the foot with this a few times at the city council level and here, not being clear with what we're doing. So when you say look at a third chapter, Doug prepared something a while back that is a start of a draft of a third chapter. Does look at mean do more work on this and come back to the committee with the revised draft? Does look at it mean just look at whether or not we want to do any more and make a recommendation back to the steering committee, or something else like prepare a draft that's going to go to city council? What does that mean?
I would argue that the subcommittee does not authorized ever to do anything on its own, and they would absolutely have to come back and clear whatever things it's thinking about. It may decide to take no action. The subcommittee might look at it and say, you know what, this little preliminary gathering of stuff from wherever it came from is something we want to put in the packet. That's what we recommend, that we put in the packet or we bring it forward. But it has no independent authority. That would be my, I think, kind Robert's rules mentality about it, and everything would have to come back to the table. And absolutely. Okay, and that's everybody's understanding. And that doesn't mean, it could be zero action.
Yeah, no, I just
Okay. I think
learning from past mistakes.
it's a smart,
Yeah.
smart. Okay, so we're about 17 minutes. I really do want to get to this. I think this is a very interesting.
This one's more important than number 3, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we're still in the design. You have to take a break? Okay, go for it.
I'll be back in a flash.
Okay.
Take your time.
Anyone else need a
No worries,
break?
Take your time, but hurry.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce it a little bit, Melanie, can I?
Well, let's
Should we wait?
couple minutes.
Oh,
Let's wait.
okay,
Let's wait.
okay.
I don't wanna-
You're worried?
Yeah.
You're not worried about me? Okay. All right.
My wife's Papu great-grandfather used to say that all the time. Take your time, but hurry.
Well, that's a new one, and so is get your poop in a group.
Poop in a group.
Is that like
way of saying get your shit.
Is that like a,
It's, I learned that from one of our county sheriffs. Great. It's a police.
No.
you learn something new every day.
I'm hoping that we can have enough meetings.
I'm going to trust in
I
his
hear Brandon's concerned about getting design
open-mindedness.
guidelines 1 and 2 done,
Yeah.
for the council. I'm hoping we can meet enough times before
Because
December to
he's
really get to
as
the
you know,
nitty-gritty of all of that and make sure it's everything we want.
has different attitudes about what we've been doing, like snatching it
So,
away
I mean, with everybody in the
from
hospital
Brandon,
and
that sort of thing.
away and,
We all gotta stop going to the hospital.
yes,
So
we gotta
reopen that
stay alive
discussion.
and well, as somebody said. So, yeah.
You have a
that's-
suggestion?
No, no, I was just,
Couple of big meetings coming up next. One is going
I'm
through
going
page
to,
by page, looking at the pictures, deciding
Tuesday,
what you want to change.
call Bobby Richards and talk to him about, not about your idea, just about the importance of the setting and
Okay.
We just did all this work at the last meeting, decided
see if we can get at least another vote somewhere.
holding graph after there's not Nori anymore, so it's gonna be my staff, and I'll work with Victoria, 'cause she took as many notes probably more than I did.
You say,
for all that, so, and she's
talk
got
about the setting,
original control over the red lines, of the
Yeah, how the wall's part of the setting. I don't want to just focus on the wall, or that the wall is part of the development.
oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
and the spaces,
We may do that in a more,
which the Secretary of Interior talks about.
Great. Yeah.
milestone, bigger document, we need to get more people on the table to discuss that.
Christy Reimers.
I truly don't mean any offense by that, we do need to get more people involved in that. December is to basically have a final draft that's ready to start going through December of this year. They said end of December, so I'm taking that away. December 31st, New Year's Eve. Yeah. All right.
Okay, we're back. So we may be able to get through this now. So this, you all remember that when we got the presentation about buildable and maximum buildable envelope from Nori, and we understood that that is a worthwhile experiment to put in this 2023 era guideline as a departure from, and in the zoning code, as a departure from volumetrics. That was the point of that. And part of that discussion, we realized that some of the language we have already in that we crafted and vetted amongst ourselves here at the table, that have to do with how to really illustrate through language our preferences for open forest landscape, that we had done a good job painting that picture in words, but that actually it's part of the maximum building envelope discussion too. If you extend that into the front yard and you talk about other types of structures that are in the front yard, they are creating a sense of an envelope as well, even if it doesn't have a roof on it. So the idea was, should we take a stab? And again, I think it's possible that you could, I don't want to alarm anyone, but that we could actually, the entire council and the staff and everybody could agree that we've come up with the perfect diagrams, and then find out that as we do it, that, oh, that should have been 1.5 feet, not a foot, and that we have to go back and revise it. But just as a first preliminary, even maybe adoptable geometry for how we want to express the increasing transparency that we want at the front property line. This was the diagram that we thought might be an extension of the buildable envelope concept that Nori presented. And the idea here is that, again, these 1, 2, and 4 may or may not be the right numbers, but just as as a conceptual idea to for us to consider today and decide if we want to present these numbers, present this concept, where something, if you look at these 3 lines, what Brandon's done here is he's got a red line that would be for things that are opaque. Masonry, stucco, stone, anything that's absolutely opaque tends to be, I mean, you could do a wood opaque fence also. It's really like tight joints, yeah, with 0 space between them. But generally, we're talking probably about stacked masonry type construction. And if you're going to do something like that in your front yard, and this is the property line, we're asking that it be more like in a curb type scale. That's what this shows right now. 1 foot is about a curb, might be retaining a little landscaping, might be like a planter, whatever. If you're willing to go up to something that is more semi-transparent, like fences with slots in between them, and other types of construction that I can't imagine right now, then you can go higher on the front property line. And then if you're going to do something that we think is either just landscaping, I don't know if we're calling that what are you thinking that means? Yeah, go ahead.
So landscaping isn't actually controlled right now at the front and from a height perspective. This would be, so right now our city code allows you to have a 4-foot tall open grape stake fence right on the property line. That's sort of the standard of fencing right now, but that would be very open. You know, you're looking at 2 inches between stakes. So these, you know, the difference between a moderately transparent and a fully transparent fence, those would have to be fleshed out too. So maybe moderately transparent is, you know, less than 1/2 inch between stakes. And if you go to 2 inches between stakes, then you're considered full transparent and you can have 4 feet. This is all conceptual at this point. You know, these lines where the green, red, and blue lines cross that front property line axis, that's where the height of that structure would be there. And Victoria and I talked about this concept, and as you move back along those lines, you can see that whatever type of structure that is, whether it's a fully transparent, moderately transparent, or not transparent structure, you can get taller as you move back, realizing that by the time you get back to that minimum setback line, that 15 feet, you can have a 6-foot tall solid wall there. That's what our code allows right now. Once you get to the 15-foot line, they're that far enough in the property that there's no regulation about the front setback. Yeah.
So I think the idea is, another way to put it is, if you want a 4-foot stone wall, you have to go back along the red line to the point where you're at 4 feet, and however far back that is, and in this case it would be, that's where 4 feet is? Okay. Oh, right, obviously, yeah. So for something transparent, I mean super opaque, Yeah,
That's how far back you'd have to stick the 4-foot rock wall.
Can I see that, Brandon?
is this to scale? Is that 15 feet, do you think? Is this?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay, that's why I think it's
Yeah.
a little deceptive.
We see, to get to the 4 feet, you'd have to come way back on this red line versus you're already on the blue line 4 feet right here.
So maybe word to the wise, we don't think this is necessarily to scale.
Is this diagram 15 feet? Can I put a dimension on this?
It's
meant to be.
It's a little shy, I think. I think it's more like
Just asking, is this diagram 15 feet or not?
not to scale, not to scale.
I'm not talking about that.
Oh, yeah, no, it's meant to be 15 feet. So this is the 15, this is the 0 foot at the front property line, and then this taller brown line is supposed to be the 15-foot setback. And so, yeah, and then one of the conversations that Brandon and I had before this meeting was, do we treat a hedge as something a little extraordinary, in the sense that nothing in our landscape guidelines talks about hedges. I don't think we even mention the word hedge, because generally they're thought to be too formal. So one of these lines could be for hedge, just because it's never been regulated or discussed anywhere, I don't think. Now, landscaping in general is not zoned. You can, there's all sorts of natural things that happen that we have no purview over. But what we're trying to do is get folks to landscape their front yards, not lawns, and we're trying to get hedges or anything else that is super formal to be further back from the property line. Obviously, a fence and a wall are sort of formal things, even if they're formal structures, even if they're loose and organic looking.
There are a lot of hedges around here that are extremely dense and right on the property line, and, very uninviting. But at least they're green.
Okay, they're green.
That's fine.
So I think we hadn't talked about this. This is kind of in the category of our little list from before, but we have not discussed hedges before, and Brandon and I thought, well, this actually does raise that issue. So we could add hedge as a concept, as a design element to the design guidelines, and start to talk about maybe that if you put a hedge on the property line, that's 4 feet, instead of fully transparent, because we don't really know what that means, but maybe that blue line represents hedges. I don't know. So the question is, do folks think this accurately diagrams what we've said about our preferences? Do these heights make sense to us as something to propose to the council? There's a question for Brandon. The 6-foot brown line here is also where the building could start. So this is almost like,
So this is really,
it's like
That's what
15
Mary Ann's
feet
point-
minus 1
that was
inch.
Mary Ann's point last time.
Right.
This is really 14 feet, 11.9 inches is what that line is.
Right, 11.11 inches, 11.9, yeah. So in other words, what Brandon is saying is, if this thing is not at the building line, then it has to be 6 foot or less. As soon as it actually hits 15 feet, it can be the full height of the front building wall.
Yeah. We're not
So-
going to let somebody build a 24-foot tall wall.
Right.
But, that's the point, though, is we're trying to control this front 15 feet where there's meant to be some sensitivity to height.
Right, the 14-foot 11 or whatever, right before that building wall. But theoretically, somebody could build, and would not offend any of us, I think, here, is if you had a full-height wall here that was a courtyard wall, and you go through a door into the courtyard, and that is that's just the front. Let's say your house is shaped like a C, facing the street, and the space of the sea is walled off to the street. That's your house wall. You are allowed to do that. You would be allowed to do that now. So there's a possibility of a 15-foot hedge, or a 20-foot hedge, or a 20-foot, but only at the building line. Anything from 14.999 feet forward is an independent structure, not affiliated with the building, and needs to be at these lower heights. That's already the rule. And the question is, do we want to have it?
What happens at the 11 feet? I'm confused.
Uh,
What was that dimension?
14 foot 11 or 14.99 feet back. This is what this regulates, this diagram. It regulates things that are independent of the building, that are in front of the building. So
Those full, those terribly high hedges that are right on the property line, that are all over the place.
we could regulate that, or we could propose design guidance for that.
It's the same as a wall, except it's green.
Right now, they're permitted, right?
Yes. Mhm. Shall we say some words about that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so this is our opportunity. We can label, for example, we could label blue line, or we could have another line that's 6 feet tall for hedges. You know, this is a decision, this is again not our decision finally, it's a recommendation we're gonna make. And hopefully Brandon will agree or will tell us what he likes as a recommendation.
I don't know why a hedge wouldn't follow the same lines as this. It's
Right.
supposed to opaque.
Okay.
I mean, even when wood or leaves.
Okay. So it's going to be hard, I would argue, to regulate the transparency of the hedge. So we could just say the hedge should be the 4-footer.
4 foot.
The 4
period.
foot.
And no worrying about,
Okay. So one proposal on the table is that we say that the 4-foot blue line applies to hedges. And that does it apply to anything else is a question.
Right now, it would apply to the very open slatted
Yeah.
fence.
Yeah.
That's the way it is right now.
yeah,
Are we okay with that?
yeah.
Okay. So Melanie's okay, but I'm going to make sure the whole table's okay with the idea that a super open grape stake type of fence could also be at the hedge line at 4 feet. And I think we would then have to define how open that is, because currently we have in the guidelines the maximum allowable opacity is a 1-to-1 ratio. That is not, in my mind, super transparent. That is half transparent. It's 50% transparent. So, but we might say 50% transparent is allowed at 4 feet. Or we might say it has to be 75% transparent. Right now, we are just saying maximum closure.
Like a 6-foot wide fence board,
Yeah.
you have to have 3 inches between boards,
So if you have a 6-foot wide,
6-inch wide.
oh, 6 inch, sorry, 6 inch,
Wide board.
and then 3 inch.
You're saying there need to be a 3-inch gap between each board? Or
Yeah,
6?
but-
Or 6?
We say 6 to 6 in this, in our document now, 1-to-1. I don't know where that came from. I think that was in Nori's draft from February, actually. I don't think we've ever
Something
discussed
like
it.
This,
That would look
this
weird.
big with,
I know.
I mean, that's a hideous fence.
It's horrible.
I mean, Jiminy Christmas, what are we saying?
We've
I
never,
would've got my head stuck in that as a kid.
we have not, I don't believe, my memory serves, if it serves, that is just language received from the February draft of a 1-to-1 ratio. We've never discussed that. This would be a good moment to discuss it.
I think it's more about regardless, I mean, what I've seen in fence design is regardless of how wide the slats are, whether it's a 6-inch board or a 1-inch, grape stake, you know, it's about the spacing. You know, like a 2-inch spacing is a pretty comfortable spacing. 3 inches gets to be really wide. When you get down to like a 1/2 inch or less, that's really tight. Like you can't see through that, even at a 1/2 inch. Even though there's space, you can't see through it. So it seems to me like the 2 to 3 inch range, regardless of how wide the boards are, that provides visibility through a fence.
Yeah, but we don't want things that look like, you know, subdivisions out of Los Angeles or something. You know, where the boards are like this big. We like our grape stakes that we have that are consistent with our traditional fences. I mean,
Well, the fence would go through design review as well, but my point is, that rather than relying on a 50 to 50 or what, I think it should be in inches. And then let the design guidelines regulate what the materials of the fence are, even if it's just grape stakes. I think it's better to just say, you know, between 2 and 3 inches is considered very open. A very open fence, 2 to 3 inch spacing between whatever the fencing material is a very open fence, I would offer.
and not do the 50% or anything like that. So,
Well, I'm going to have to, I'll find that and see what we did there. But one thing I will say is that, let's say you got a 4-foot board with a 3-inch gap between each 4-foot board. that's very different than a 3-inch gap with a 3-inch board, because it just has more, so it's.
We're not going to approve your full.
You're not? So the question is, is it a both and? Minimum of 3-inch gap is transparent and maximum of a certain, board width. I don't know. We have not discussed it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Victoria and I talked about in talking about this before the meeting is this is really to get sort of like a thumbs up, thumbs down, red light, green light from all of you, whether this conceptually is good. So I don't know if we need to try to flesh out every detail of it at this point. Just conceptually, does it make sense to the committee that different levels of transparent structure should be treated differently as you move from front to back along that 15-foot setback?
And does the diagram make sense to folks? I mean, because again, we're a table of mostly lay folks here in terms of designers, et cetera. And the question is, do you think people could understand this? That if it's more transparent, it can be higher at the property line, and that does this graph make some sense if it's refined?
If it's got
labeled.
more detail on it, like you have been discussing it, I think that would be understandable.
And does anyone have any, I don't see many people shaking their heads about these numbers. That's another question. Does these numbers seem right to people? 4 feet for something that's a hedge, 1 foot for something that's like masonry, garden wall?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's appropriate.
Okay, so this is a good first stab. Yeah. 2.53, thank you. Okay, yes, this was, again, I think the February language. 2.5.3, if vegetation does not provide sufficient safe enclosure, install an informal unfinished wood fence which preserves visual access into the front yard and at street intersections by using open pickets wherein the size of the spaces are at least equal to the size of the material.
Yeah, that's 50%.
50% plus is what we're saying. Oh, well, right, but in terms of overall opacity, it's 50%.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. What section is that?
This is 2.5.3. So this actually helps us know where this should be, too. 2.5.3. Say that again, Doug?
What if they don't use open pickets?
Well, they have to. I think that's what this is saying, is that your fence has to be open at a minimum of 1 to 1.
That's what it's saying.
Because it uses the word picket.
Yeah, it says by
Okay. So
using
that-
open
it should be by
pickets.
the word. It should be whatever the fence material, fence board, or fence member, or something like that. That's a good catch.
Well, if I were Mary Ann sitting here, I would say, and just, this is not something I don't think we've ever fully upped or downed. She would say, I think, all the fences should be the Carmel fence. The one that's very rustic, and that would be her position. And I don't know.
You're going to make Mary Ann's position for it?
She said that many times, right? She said that everything in the right-of-way, but then you move back an inch, and it doesn't have to be that. So I guess, she's saying that, I believe, again, I'm happy to be corrected if I'm getting this wrong, but I think that she has asserted many times things that are on the property line and in the right-of, they would never be in the right-of-way, but basically on the border of the right-of-way should be of the same language of the right-of-way. They should be a traditional Carmel aesthetic, and as it moves back. Now, that we haven't addressed really either. I think this pickets thing, which is, again, from February, evokes that. There's a photo right next to it that looks like a traditional.
I think Doug's right, though. I can hear an applicant say, well, this just says pickets. I'm using boards. So
Mhm.
you can't tell me
Well,
what
we
to do.
don't want boards.
Right.
We don't want boards. I mean, when I think of boards, I think of something like this, like this, like this. I mean, that's not Carmel at all.
A 2-inch board could be appropriate. A 2-inch picketed fence.
How big is 2 inches? Is that 2 inches?
Yeah.
No, yours is bigger than mine.
I think I'm right, though. I think that's 2 inches. Between my fingers is 2 inches.
So are we sticking just with pickets? So,
It's never been discussed fully.
okay, so let me play where opposition's going to come. Chris Tesher has built several houses recently, one at Carmelo and 7th, and on the east side of Casanova between 12th and 13th. They have boards, horizontal boards. Right. I mean, so we're saying no horizontal board fences.
We've never said it one way or the other.
Well, I mean, from what's here.
Yeah, pickets implies vertical.
Not Carmel, and it's less than a block, and it's only 7 houses from Davis Toad.
Okay, I'm just clarifying.
So I would say that currently the guidelines are silent on direction of fence. I think pickets implies vertical, but it doesn't go into it much, so.
You can say vertical.
We can say vertical. I think that's personally, I've always appreciated Mary Ann's sort of, overall consistency idea about the public right-of-way. That would be a very radical change to what we allow to say that you have to have a certain direction of the board. There are certain fences now that are rustic, that are kind of a combination of like tilted and kind of random.
We had this conversation.
We did.
I think we left it at that's tipping too far into like HOA level, controlling people's fence designs. Like, let's let the rest of the design guidelines manage what a fence looks like, rather than telling people exactly what material and direction their fence boards should go.
When it's so out of context with the block and with the neighborhood, yeah, that has to be taken into consideration. Because, I mean, if it's like the one that Doug's talking about, it's very, very, very out of character. The whole property is totally out of character with the neighborhood, with the block.
Well, what amplifies that particular project
Well,
is
absolutely.
it's two lots.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
let me throw this out here. So we do, this diagram could have 5 lines, it could have 1 line, it could have 2 lines. Right now it has 3 lines. The top one we've said is a hedge and or a very open, 50% or more open fence. The second one down, there could be a middle one that's for fences that diverge from that. And then the person who's the applicant has to decide, do I want to maximize my feeling of front yard, or do I want the style to be more independent, and therefore and it's very important to me, so I'm going to bring it back closer to my house, and it's going to have more to do with my house. Let's say it's a house that has horizontal siding and they want to have a horizontal fence. I think that could be a way to address Melanie's concerns and Mary Ann's concern, which is that if it's on the property line, maybe it should be of the vocabulary of a natural, vertical-ish, open hedge, et cetera. But that's what I was trying to say, Melanie, is this might help you and Mary Ann if we reserve this middle line, the one that's green, for things that deviate from the Carmel style, basically. So either you're getting more opaque, so you're going below the 50%, but not to full opacity, that's the red line, or you're changing the type of fence it is. So it's not the typical Carmel open picket fence, and then you have to decide, you have to sacrifice pushing it out to the street or pushing it out to the property line. And that might take care of it without making folks feel like they have their artistic freedom is impinged upon. Brandon, what do you think?
Sounds good.
Okay, all right. All right, so this is, I think it's a way to let everybody do what they're needing to do, but don't put the stuff that's not Carmel right out at the property line.
So we'll roll this.
Okay.
We'll roll this concept into the sandwich, I keep calling it, that comes back. So it'll be in there. More comments can be had on it. Once I think we've gotten from a staff level, I think I've got really good feedback from y'all where you're at on this.
Oh, can I just say one thing while we're talking about this?
We're past 4, so we're going to go 5 more minutes.
Okay, We've said in the design guidelines, no irrigation in the public right-of-way.
Yes.
Well, nobody knows that these days. I mean, I just had a horrible example of that, and I even picked up all of the stuff that they left in the middle of the street last night on one frontage of their property. They've got so much tubing and yada yada in this area. It's ridiculous. And then that house that you're talking about with that hideous fence, they've got irrigation all over the place, and, you know, we've got to figure out some way, maybe when people purchase property, to let them know about trash cans, about the public right-of-way, and about some of this stuff, because it's no good for us to write these guidelines and do the ordinance and so forth if the public doesn't know about what they're supposed to do and not supposed to do. So I mentioned that because last night practically broke my neck on some of the stuff that the debris, I mean, these long baby black tubes and the little, emitters at the ends of them, they're all over the street. So,
I'm holding out hope, as I think Brandon is, again, I don't want to speak for him, that the completion of this becomes a launching pad for some better clarity and some backup for the folks in the field to be able to have those conversations with applicants or with residents. Okay, so we're going to move now, unless there's any very urgent things on just the topics we were just talking about, to 6 future agenda items, which is really, I think, where this issue of the photo, how we're going to handle the photo thing. We really don't have much time on this, but
We'll bring that back, and we need to bring back the sandwich. So those are the two
yeah.
big future agenda items.
We weren't really planning on delving into anything with photos today anyway. Mary Ann's absent, but I think we should just continue that item to the next meeting. And whether we have a general discussion about it or we actually have a detailed discussion about it last time, I think is fine. That's my view. Is there anything else in terms of a future agenda items besides the photography thing and the other stuff we've talked about that anyone wants to pipe up on right now? Do we know when Mary Ann's coming back?
Like a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah. It's not a long trip.
Should we look just at a general thought of when the next meeting could be, or do you want to do that some other
I don't
time?
think everyone here keeps their calendar with them, so I can just continue.
Do you want to do it later?
Yeah, my
Okay.
analog doodle poll.
yeah, thank you, Brad.
Any other final thoughts before we get out? It's still sunny out. It was productive. Yeah?
I just wanted to thank Brandon and your team. I mean, you guys are working so hard on all of this stuff, and I can't imagine how you're doing it, so thank you.
He's still standing. He looks healthy. He looks healthy today. Feeling good. All right, thanks, everybody. We're adjourned 1/4 after.